Welcome to a new segment of CloseUp, rewatching film classics. My name is Bruce Isaacs. I can't think of a better time than right now to appreciate the unique, weirdly subversive genre of zombie movies. So zombie movies have always been great sociocultural lenses. You might have seen George Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, maybe the two classics of the genre, late 60s, early 1970s. They're on one level great horror films. They're thrilling, they're suspenseful, they're terrifying. Zombie movies, perhaps more than any other genre, can gross you out. And that's for those of you who've seen Lucio Fulci's classic Zombie of 1979. But it is critical that zombie films are such fantastic political allegories, which is why I was very excited when Hollywood took on the adaptation of Max Brooks's World War Z. This was a big novel. An apocalyptic zombie novel, but it was more than just a genre work, and certainly it was more than just a piece of horror zombie literature. It was also an attempt to speculate on what changes when everything changes on a global scale. Baby. The greatest threat posed by the zombie as a horrific figure is really, and I think in the simplest sense, to our sense of individuality. I think this is the cornerstone of all great zombie films. And this is whether we're talking about the mainstream or the more subversive auteur-type zombie films that we see with Romero or even Fulci. Zombies bring you into their horrific mass thoughtlessness. They're unique, I think, as not even supernatural but embodied horrific figures. They bring you into a very different sense of self and externalized selves. I love the way zombies confront me with an image of the world in which my identity is stripped away. It forces me into a contemplation of, what if I don't exist? What if I'm just a part of this globalized mass, inhumane, undifferentiated body? Or a scale of bodies? What if that's all that I am? More than just the loss of the selves, zombie movies enact the loss of self and the threat of that loss on a global scale. Zombie movies should always be apocalyptic threats. First, they infect individuals, that's true, and we see this in World War Z, we see the disease of bodies, but then gradually we expand into a global, undifferentiated mindlessness. World War Z brilliantly dramatizes this tension between individual selves, selfhoods, being unique, being unlike anything else, and the threat of the loss of that uniqueness collapsing into a kind of mass, undifferentiated body. In this sequence, our protagonist, who is played by Brad Pitt, perhaps the most familiar American actor, has arrived in Jerusalem, and he is searching for patient zero, the root of the pandemic that has really destroyed the world. Fittingly, he finds himself in Jerusalem. It's a very carefully chosen site because it's a site of global Western historical narrative. We see this overhead shot come in here, and we see the internal and the external parts of the city and the wall that separates the individual from the mass. So Jerusalem is a place of intersecting religions, cultures, and political mythologies. In this scene, World War Z deftly traces this tension between an individual, Brad Pitt, maybe the most individuated of all Hollywood stars. You know, Brad Pitt is never just a character. Brad Pitt is also the Brad Pitt of the Hollywood star system and a part of our general cultural celebrity lexicon of images. So we see the individual against the incoming threat of the mass, and that tension is quickly signaled in the focalization of Pitt and the wide overhead mass shots of the body of zombies. As we close into the wall of the city, we cut between the zombies outside and those citizens within the walls. The undifferentiated shriek is counterpoised with the conversation we've been listening to. Brad Pitt's very precise, measured, clipped phrasing and conversation. And this is a very common trope in suspense sequences. The soundscapes of the interior and the exterior begin to merge. The voices of the citizens take on the high-pitched, undifferentiated timbre of the zombies who are about to enter.
We have a breach of salvation.
Let's take a second look at that pivotal moment when the two spaces come together. Okay, so we hold on Brad Pitt tight, but we pull back now in a complementary digital shot. First we were outside, now inside. In the same way that we pulled back on the massive bodies on the outside, we now pull back on the individual. And it's really an effective shot because as we pull up from Brad Pitt, notice that he's pointing. He points now at the bodies that are coming over the wall. He sees it. He's the focalized protagonist who sees the merging of the two spaces. And the bodies start to fall over the wall. And now the collapse of the two spaces is complete. And now we embark upon what is no less affecting but conventional, the horror coming to the interior of the city. So what has been achieved here? I think what makes this so interesting as a genre is that World War Z is really trafficking in tropes that are very familiar to this genre. To take the individual and pit it against the mass of bodies. But it's not just that it's terrifying or that it's horrific or that these bodies are actually very uncomfortable to look at. When I watch these sorts of movies, every time I see the body, the mass body of the zombie, and its gradually encroaching threat to my individual body, there's a genuine sort of existential angst and I think a sense of alienation from our more conventional selves that we feel. And I think this is why there's just so much interesting scholarship on zombies as being this sort of uncanny, strange, alienated selves. That when we watch zombie movies, the reason we feel so uncomfortable is not necessarily that it's a traditional horror film, but that the zombie in itself represents the collapse of what we take to be the most basic sense of ourselves, which is our individualism. I think it's also what continues to make zombie movies so subversive and so fantastically resilient as a film genre. Thanks for listening.